Welcome to another episode of the Auto Buyer's Guide podcast. Today we're going to be talking about tires. We're going to be talking about advancing safety legislation around the world. Some of these are going to be controversial. And of course, new cars that we have driven and new cars that we are excited to be driving coming up soon. So Travis, I know we have some slightly differing opinions on some new car features and functions, but I find it interesting, I think we both find this interesting, that we're seeing legislation of safety features coming from China now, a market that has historically been a follower, not a leader on safety regulations. Normally it's been North America or Europe that's driven a lot of the worldwide safety registration or regulations and restrictions and norms.
Mhm.
But we have some interesting ones coming out of China now.
Well, the thing is, China's producing a lot of vehicles. So where they are in that market, and honestly, not just the command they have for the attention, but just the power they have in this arena has changed drastically. And there's some interesting stuff coming through. Honestly, I was this week with Nissan, and one of the big questions from a lot of journalists is, why do you not have one pedal driving? And they said, well, there are some regulations that we're just considering. And it's one of those small things where it turns out there are concerns. There are, there's software limitations and financial limitations. So you have to build two different versions of software. And it's not just that. I mean, I think it was back in 2015 where we had to have backup cameras coming to all new vehicles. But we're talking about some different stuff here.
Yeah, so the first topic that struck me interesting here was that China is now considering, and this is somewhat relevant to some recent cases that we've seen news stories in North America. China is considering banning electronic door releases. This is not just the pop-out handles that we see in Teslas. They're talking everything: the push buttons on Mach-E's, the various buttons on the insides of Jeeps, etc. This growing trend of electronic rather than mechanical door latches. And the reason they're saying is safety. Too many people being trapped in cars when electrical systems fail. They also, and this one I do not quite understand the logic behind this, but they're saying that some of these mechanisms are more prone to failure after a side impact accident. And so it prevents rescuers from being able to get in the vehicle or the occupants from being able to get out. But if you recall, we recently had people in some EVs, because this is primarily an EV thing, although it's expanding across to a bunch of different Jeep models, for
Especially
instance.
luxury cars and
Yeah.
stuff, trying to make
hmm
things smoother and feel
And
fancier.
cooler. Right. Lots of
Right.
Lincolns are doing this.
hmm
And we've had a bunch of people recently drown in vehicles because their electronic door release either didn't work or they couldn't figure it out. And this is where some of the nuance is interesting here, because all these car companies have a way to get out of the vehicle mechanically. But I was recently talking to someone about this, and there was a review on, I believe it was the Jeep Wagoneer S, the electric
Okay.
Jeep.
hmm
And they were saying, oh, there's no mechanical door release. And I said, there is. It's just in a stupid spot. And if,
You have to know where it's at. And in an
right,
emergency, you go for the door handle. You don't think,
exactly,
where was that secondary door release?
that you've never used ever in your life. And
Right.
maybe someone pointed out, maybe they didn't. Maybe you read your manual. Maybe you
hmm
didn't. So
Mm,
you're left groping around.
right. Here's an interesting poll question. Who reads their manual? Now,
hmm
I think if we put out that poll, we're going to get probably a higher hit rate than I think is going to cover the average consumer. I think folks listening to our podcasts are pretty in tune with what's going on their vehicle and lots of others. However, I know, so in my Tesla, I have a button release, but
hmm
within arm's reach and often confused for the release is going to be the manual version. And
hmm
that's great, except for they tell you, please don't use the manual version. It's not intended for, the same frequency of use as a regular door handle. But that one is probably easier, although I'm not even sure where it's at for the back seats. So those folks might
Yeah.
end up in a little bit of trouble. And I admittedly haven't read my manual to see where that release is, probably because I'm in the front seat on that one.
And if anybody, because we do have, I'm sure, some Tesla fans out there, if anybody could tell us why Tesla does not want you to use the mechanical release on a regular basis, which I agree, I find actually more convenient than the electronic release in the Model 3.
Mm.
I I just don't know why. Like, what is it about it that you're not supposed to be doing?
And again, so having worked for Tesla, I don't have an official answer. I didn't work within their service department. I think it is just meant for, hey, it's maybe a little bit more industrial than it is consumer. Hey, this is going to get that door open, but there's a mechanism that's shifting and it's not designed.
Does it
You know,
not
you know,
lower the
you know
window?
what I mean? I haven't checked. I can. Maybe I'll go check after this, and we'll throw a little
Yeah. Because I know
note
in
up
some
there. But
vehicles with electronic door releases, the sashless or sill-less windows, if you
mhm.
use the mechanical one, it doesn't cause the car to lower the window. So you may wear that seal out.
Right, right. That's probably a good guess. But yeah, I'll
Yeah.
check it out after we're done recording here.
I will say, once upon a time, General Motors, in the very early days of electronic door releases, some of the first cars that had them, they had this huge red, like, pull tab or a big red webbing thing. So it was
Hmm.
more obvious, I would say, in an emergency if you're looking around, hey, there's this red thing, pull on the red thing. But
Hmm.
but if you're not using it every day, are you going to be hardwired for that? That's kind of the reason when they're talking about pilot safety, safety, gun training, any kind of critical situation training,
Hmm.
repetitive operation is important. Like, if you want to be a good shot, you need to go to the driving range, or not the driving range, you need to go to the gun range very frequently.
Hmm.
If you want to be a good golfer, you got to go to the driving range all the time, right? It's not like it's going to come back to you in that same
There's
precision after that much
there's a
time.
difference. There's a difference between having your CPR card and having just gone through the CPR class,
Mhm.
where you go, yes, I have just
Exactly.
practiced that action, and it's going to be immediate pop up memory versus 6 8 months down the line, and you go, I know that. Hold on 1 second. I think we have
Mhm.
the card that says we know it, but do we remember it? Have we practiced it? And yeah, that's where you run into an issue. Actually, I don't remember what car it is, so whoever it is gets saved here. Where I was shocked about where they had put the emergency flasher button, because we never go for the emergency flasher button. But
Mhm.
sometimes, you and I do. We got to pull over and we do something real quick, and then we jump back on. Where a lot of folks wouldn't do that, but I was going, where is this button? I cannot find it. And we're used to know, hey, it's normally up here or it's right in the center dash and it's just off. It was like
Mhm.
tucked off to the side in the corner. I went, oh, no one's going to be able to find that. In an emergency,
Mhm.
you need to be able to go to it right away.
At least it wasn't one of those weird twisty pull things on top of the steering column like they
Yeah.
used to have, you know?
Like I have in my truck that I 100% did not know how to use the first time I needed
Mhm.
it. Yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely.
But this thought process of the regular muscle memory, basically, for particular functions goes into the next part of this, which is interesting, and I'm wondering how this is going to affect research for sure, because there's a limited amount of research, but also
Mm,
legislation in other markets, because China has already decided to ban one-pedal driving, sort of.
mhm,
Every new EV being submitted for approval starting January 1st, 2026, and every EV sold in China starting January 1st, 2027, will make you re-enable one-pedal driving every time you turn on the car. And there are going to be some additional rules around this about how much deceleration the vehicle can actually give you without the one pedal driving on,
mhm.
and when brake lights turn on, etc. But I was interested that China seems to be the one focusing on this particular kind of safety. There's a little bit of research on it, but there's not a lot, which is interesting. So
Yeah.
this
I think a
this
lot of it's anecdotal, and I'm not, and we've talked about this
Mhm.
before with one pedal driving. Is it safer, and
Hmm.
are there
Mhm.
complications with it? And actually, a lot of that goes back to, are more accidents caused by one pedal driving because people aren't switching over to the brake pedal
Mhm.
fast enough, quick enough, and I think people who are going right now from an ICE vehicle or a hybrid or whatever, but for internal combustion of some
Mhm.
sort to EVs, they are going to know how to make the switch. But what we're talking about is sort of the next generation. If you've only ever
Well,
grown up driving EV, are you going to use that brake pedal quick enough?
it's actually still both, because this is interesting. There is some research on this. The School of Automotive Studies in Shanghai put drivers on simulators,
Mhm.
and these drivers were, by and large, generally speaking, ICE drivers as well. So some of them were EV drivers, some of them were ICE drivers, but in this group they discovered that even relatively short-term use in these vehicles with one pedal driving, there wasn't that muscle memory to find the brake pedal in an
Mhm.
accident. So this is kind of an interesting one. They said, here's the result here. The regenerative braking system did not affect driver perception or reaction of the lead vehicle braking event. So basically, it didn't cause them to, not know what's going on with the lead vehicle. And drivers extended throttle release to avoid rapid speed drops when the lead vehicle braked slowly. So no issues braking slowly. One pedal mode exhibited a longer throttle to brake transition time and increased uncertainty in timing of brake pedal applications, however. The one pedal mode was safer than the two pedal mode in low urgency situations. So driver consistency was there in low urgency situations. But
Right.
in high urgency situations, it became unsafe and uncertain situations due to delayed braking. So that's basically their thought process there. And then they call out in this study, which is published, by the way. So it's a published research paper, but even in this one, mind you, they say much more research is needed, that they didn't have the opportunity to do this in the wild.
Hmm.
But they did comment that this data does seem to mirror what we saw in the United States. Again, modern research needs to be applied here. But in 2020, the IAHS data says back when Tesla accounted for 90% of EVs on the road in the US, EVs were involved in 1.21 crashes per million miles driven versus 1.1 for ICE vehicles,
Okay.
25% more likely to be involved in a fatal accident than an ICE vehicle. Now, since 90% of accidents they're saying in the study are driver behavior, they're saying this has nothing to do with it being an EV. This has to do
Right.
with driver behavior and driver behavior interaction and pedal misapplication or timing delays, et cetera. So that's the interesting part there. The question, I guess, will be if China's really interested in this topic, we should know, by 2030, because if every EV doesn't have this option going forward, we'll we'll start to see some differences. I'm
Yeah.
also I'm
Yeah.
also personally intrigued to see going forward now that Tesla's market share has dropped and we have EVs that don't default to one pedal driving like
Mhm.
this. Is it any different?
It's a good question. So, like I said, I was at Nissan, and they said, we have 3 or 4 different regen levels, four regen levels, and then we have our e-step button, and e-step is their highest, but
Mm-hmm.
it's a standalone button versus something within the software. This is not as easily accessible. I said, go over here. This is the highest level. It's still not one pedal
Mm-hmm.
driving. It will not bring you to a stop. And effectively, that doesn't bother me because it does still have significant regen. It just means you're going to
Mm-hmm.
have to switch over to the brake pedal. And a lot of people had feelings on that one, and maybe a little bit more aggressive than I would have been. But Nissan said, "Hey, listen, there's some regulations that we're keeping an eye on, and in theory, this is something they
Mm-hmm.
can switch over." But the way I look at it, and I do think some of it comes down to finances, is if you have markets where this vehicle is going to be sold, instead of putting 2 different software profiles in that enables one pedal driving or doesn't, you say, hey, we're going to do one, and to start, we're going to do the one that's going to cover everywhere as this vehicle rolls out. I love one pedal driving, but in my mind, when I think one pedal driving, my first thought is actually significant regen, and regen
Mm-hmm.
where I do not have to reach for the brake pedal in everyday
But it's more of a
I don't know,
convenience.
transitional things. But coming to a stop is the definition of one pedal driving,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't think of it in the same way. I just need to know I have significant
Mm-hmm.
regen, so I don't have to go
Right.
throttle brake. But yeah.
It's like my impression of your like of one pedal driving has more to do with convenience.
Mhm. And consistency and smoothness. So you
Oh,
and I have
definitely not
debated this.
smoother.
You and I have debated this one forever, but I like to be able to dial in and out the power, right? Just a little bit here, a little bit there, and the debate will go on forever.
There
But
there are there is some research on this.
mhm,
One pedal drivers do seem to have a higher incidence of motion sickness for passengers in the vehicle. There's been blind studies done on that one. So that one
sure.
we can call the smoothness thing a non-issue. I would say it's mostly convenience, but I would say that to your point in the press conference with Nissan, there are a significant number of automotive journalists that do not understand how regenerative braking works
Mhm,
and what blended braking is. So
right.
there is this pervasive belief among some Tesla fans and a decent number of journalists that if you do not have one pedal driving, that you're leaving electrons on the table.
Oh, and by the definition, it's a fraction of a hair because we're talking under 20 and 15 miles an hour that you go throttle brake. And
Hmm.
and there is not a lot to be gained in that last moment. And so
Hmm.
and you're still, like you said,
And you're
you're
still
still
regenerating.
getting
Yeah,
right.
and when you put
You're
your
still
foot on the brake
getting
pedal, you're still
blended
blended
braking.
braking. So that that is
Unless
that
you're in a
is
Rivian or a Tesla.
Correct. That is the flaw, I think, in a lot of these people's logic is even in the electric side by side that we are reviewing right now, it has blended
Oh,
braking. It's like almost,
are you gonna have that into next week?
yes, almost
Excellent.
almost every EV model sold has blended braking, except for Tesla and Rivian and a select number of other car companies out there. And that's the important
Is
thing for viewers to understand is that
Yeah.
blended braking means when you put your foot on the brake pedal of a Nissan Ariya or a Blazer EV or a Polestar or a BMW or a Mercedes or a Porsche, it does not mean that the brake caliper is actually pressing the brake pad against the disc. It means that it's commanding regeneration until you have hit the maximum the car can do.
Hmm.
Then you engage the friction brakes. And that's the tricky bit is there are actually a significant number of EVs that have greater regeneration potential than any Tesla ever sold in the world.
Hmm.
Taycan, for instance, has more than double the regenerative potential of a modern Tesla because of this blended braking system. Because you can actually do regen very aggressively, but in a one pedal system, you don't want it to be neck snapping regen. You don't want emergency braking level regen in a one pedal
Right.
system. And that's
Which is
part of
why.
why the
Go ahead.
safety question happens because you're not
Yeah.
going to get that emergency response by lifting off your foot.
And that's one of the things I like about Chevrolet or any other GM vehicles is they have a pedal or they have a paddle. They have a progressive paddle and an on-off paddle. I actually
Mm-hmm,
prefer the on-off paddle, and that
mm-hmm,
means if you want heavy, significant regen, you're coming down the big hill, pull the paddle first, and then start to lift off. And by pulling that paddle, you've significantly boosted how much regen is available. So you can really max out the
mm-hmm,
regen, but it's not too much too quickly all the time.
mm-hmm,
Uh, I love regen braking for every reason under the sun. I 100% make it a game. For my test loop, I have to do a consistency thing, and that one I drive less like I do every day and more like I think more people do. But I love to maximize how much regen I get before that brake is actually applied. I will say some vehicles are really good about it. Some vehicles are not. I had a Tacoma Trail Hunter, and that has a hybrid engine. But at no point does it really want to tell you I'm super hybrid. There is no charge meter, and that's honestly one of
mm-hmm.
the first hybrids I've
Yeah.
seen in a long time that has no sort of charge meter. The Prius that I have right now definitely has a charge meter, and it's got a B mode, and it's got multiple levels of regen on the B mode. I'm having the time of my life nerding out on this Prius, but yeah, I understand. I understand between drivers as well. That's another one. Is if you share the car in a household, that regen is going to be very different. And my
Mm-hmm.
Tesla basically has a light regen and a heavy regen, and there are some like that Nissan that really has 5 different levels. Hopefully those are things that pair with keys. So driver one is getting driver one's profile, and driver two is getting driver two's profile. But I'm curious about the studies. So keep them coming. I want to see
Mm-hmm.
what the people say.
Yeah, I'm intrigued to see if we see a difference in, for instance, these accident statistics. The IHS categorizes and catalogs all this data. I am going to be really intrigued because we would know better what the impact of this is if you, for instance, took a look at a vehicle that defaults to very heavy one pedal driving regeneration like every Tesla, and you compare that against an EV in the same category that does not or prefers no regeneration. So for instance, like the German car companies who spend days and nights obsessing over fractions of a percent in efficiency,
Hmm.
they say that in their studies, in real world studies, etc., that actually zero throttle liftoff regeneration is the most efficient. So strong blended braking, the ability to capture more energy in the battery than Tesla can, but by default, zero on throttle liftoff. They
Full
claim that's
coast.
the most efficient. The full coast thing. It's a
Mhm.
fraction, but they're super obsessed with that. But that
And
does mean,
I want that with the paddle. So instead of
yeah.
Chevy giving me the heavy paddle, give me the neutral paddle and give me
Hmm,
that
hmm.
full coast option. But no one's going
Better
to make that for me. So,
Better yet, give me the paddles like Hyundai, Kia, and a number of companies do, where you can adjust the regen. So you can say up or down with the paddles and however many steps you get.
but they've got an auto one, and I hate the auto one
Oh yeah,
because
don't like the auto one.
that one adjusts based on different speeds. And the problem for me is that I
Yeah.
never know what kind of regen I'm going to get once I start
Hmm,
lifting off. And that's honestly one of the only issues that I get
hmm,
with something like a Tesla or a Rivian, where you're expecting certain levels of regen. If your battery is full, you do not get that same
hmm,
level of regenerative capacity.
hmm.
That's where I will totally agree. That's where you have to be paying attention in a way that most drivers probably don't want to. That when you start lifting off, it's going to slow down differently than it did earlier that day.
Mhm. Hyundai Kia Genesis, the auto mode isn't based on speed, it's based on the distance between you and the vehicle in front of you.
Hmm. Which for
It's
me
a
generally depends
yeah,
on where I'm driving.
right,
So the
yeah,
freeway versus the
yeah.
city and that
So
sort of thing. Yeah.
it's this attempt to do sort of kind of adaptive cruise control like regenerative braking. It's an odd one. I don't like it either. I they could skip that one. But the
Yeah.
other adjustabilities I'm totally fine with. The single paddle thing, I never use it in the Blazer, to be honest. You know, our
Mhm.
Blazer we've had for 11, 12,000 miles now. And it just is not as useful as something that would let you turn the more aggressive levels on or off over time. I don't know. I'm like,
I was,
it's interesting,
yeah.
but I
Before
don't hate
before
it.
we jump to before I jump to the next one small thing that I think is so silly and honestly more difficult for the driver than it should be. When I have this Prius and I love putting it in B mode because I love engaging as much throttle liftoff regen as I can, but it will not let you put it in cruise control when you're in B mode. I have to
Mhm,
then switch
mhm,
it back over to drive, which in the Toyota is over and down to drive. If you're in drive, you pull down for B mode, but pulling down again will not disengage B mode. You got to go down and over,
mhm.
and then you have to go ahead and turn on the cruise control. And that
Yeah.
feels like something that's going to cause more issues than not. Because if you're too
Yeah.
slow and as you go over, you end up kicking it into neutral.
Yeah, I dislike the B mode generally in the Toyota products because it doesn't just say, "I want more regenerative braking," because 'cause they're calling it engine braking. It
Yeah,
is more likely to turn on the engine to
to
try and
help
keep a consistent
boost.
speed
Yeah.
than just regenerate, which I think is weird, and some of the other hybrids out there do a B mode better, I guess I would say.
Mhm.
Yeah, I don't know why they lock out cruise control there. But speaking of new rules, the IHS, and speaking of the IHS as well, for those that don't know, it's the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety. It's a
who's
nonprofit.
really concerned who's really concerned about safety because it costs them
Yes,
money.
exactly. Nonprofit funded by the insurance companies. That's the important part because they're obsessed with lowering accident rates and everything there. So that's their thing. They want to lower
Mhm.
payouts. So we all benefit in a way. I love the
They want to keep
IHS.
everyone safe, Alex. They want to keep
Right.
everyone safe.
They want to keep everybody safe. They want to keep those actuarial values of their insurance really good. But we all
Mhm.
benefit because our interests align in that way. I would like to live. They would like
Mhm.
me to not have an accident, so that way they don't have to pay anything out, right?
That Venn diagram, there's the overlap.
Yeah, there's a decent amount of overlap. Obviously, there's a whole lot of not overlap. But at any rate, I this is one I'm intrigued by. They're saying they want impaired driving and speed detection systems to be well, not they want, they are going to make it. They will be required in order to achieve the top safety pick plus rating from the IAHS, which has become ever more coveted by car companies. They use it in a lot of
Mhm.
advertising. A lot of people are now talking about safety ratings, etc. They're describing this as passive alcohol detection. So, no breathalyzer or anything, but systems
Mhm.
that will detect your impairment based on the way you drive, as well as speed detection systems that will alert you that you're going over the speed limit in areas where they have detected speed limits. And what I want to know is we already have driver monitoring, driver attention detention, drowsiness detection, etc. And these systems will show you a little coffee mug on your instrument cluster, like, oh, hey, it's time to take a break. You're driving
Mhm.
distracted. So, A, how is it going to know the difference between distracted driving and drunk driving? B, what's the icon going to be when it's detected that you're drunk driving? Is it going to be a cocktail glass?
Mhm.
How many olives will it have? And can you customize it? Say you are not a mixed drink drinker. I am
Right.
making
Will it be
light
a
of this.
wine
Sorry,
glass?
everybody.
Will it be a tall one with an umbrella? Do you get to
Yeah,
do sort of an
exactly.
old fashioned with the rotating cube? Or
Mhm.
is it just a red and blue saying, hey, you probably shouldn't be driving?
All drunk driving is bad. Preface this with that, just being totally not serious here at this moment. But is it customizable? I prefer red wine. Can I get a red wine glass on there?
Mhm.
Um, More rationally, though, I'm going to go ahead and guess that by the time you're weaving around enough for this impaired detection system to tell you that you're impaired, you're already too effed up to drive.
Yeah, here's the thing. There's a big brother question, and there's the point where this isn't about big brother like the police. This is the
Hmm.
manufacturers. being under the thumb of the insurance companies because they have a power, right? They say we can give you this rating, but only if you have this system.
Mhm.
First question is how can you turn it off? Like I
Oh,
said,
yeah.
the Prius I'm driving right now, it had a driver distraction warning,
Mhm.
and let me tell you, that thing pops off all the time, even when I did not feel in any way that I was distracted driving. And I just said, okay, I got to figure out where to turn this off. And by the way, not an easy thing to go find. Um, so turn that
Toyota's
one off.
Toyota's one is too aggressive, I think.
Yeah, or you could dial it back, but in this case, it's on or off. So can you turn it off? In theory, this whole thing is to save lives, and like on paper, that sounds great. But is the person who's going to have that message pop up and say you're too drunk to drive just go, nah, I'm good, I got this. I only, I'll be home in a minute.
That's your drunk
What's going to
impression?
happen? Well, you've seen me drunk how many times? Zero, because I don't
That's
drink.
why I'm
Um,
wondering. I'm
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
curious.
Well, we're just going real light on things. Anyway,
Okay.
if you get the message that says, "Hey, you're drunk," and you go, "Nah, I'm good, thanks,"
Mhm.
what happens then? Does it shut your
Oh,
vehicle
no.
down?
No, no, no. So the way that this seems to be is it seems to just be a variant of the drowsy driver detection system that we have now. So it's not gonna
No.
tell anybody, it's not gonna, like, flash your hazards, etcetera. It's just gonna say, "Hey, you're driving impaired in some way or another." And then it is up to you as the driver to then make good decisions, which you have theoretically already not done because you've
Right.
already drunk and then gotten behind the wheel. So this seems to be an effort to, like all safety regulations, you can speed, you can not wear your seatbelt, all of
Mhm.
these things. This just seems to be a reminder that maybe we can get the low hanging fruit. Maybe we could get that person that's a little too tipsy to drive to
Mhm.
go, oh, gee, I didn't think I was that bad. I didn't realize I was whatever. But yeah, I don't suspect it's gonna catch any serious alcoholics.
Yeah, and I mean, and here's the thing. So if it's a small thing, and at this point, it's more of like a couple lines of code because most of these vehicles already have driver monitoring systems, and so it's these systems are now just looking for different things.
Hmm.
It's
Hmm.
saying, "Hey, this." The car knows that it's on this road and it sees the lane lines and it goes, "Hey, you're doing a lot of ping ponging, and we recognize that it's past 6:30 p.m." And like there's a lot of things that it can just look for and say, "I think you might be intoxicated," and,
Hmm.
and and if it gets somebody to stop, awesome, right? I mean,
Yeah.
that's a win. It's just how intrusive is it, and is it going to be, and then what's the headline going to be, right? Because a lot of
Hmm.
people are really concerned about Big Brother, and this wouldn't be helping anything. But you're going to see it in every 3-row vehicle, just about
Hmm.
immediately, because that's one of the biggest concerns of moving families is the safest vehicle, and those lines of code might be the make or break between someone's shopping list and someone's not.
Yeah, this is an interesting economics question in a way. What is the value of a life? And that's where all safety legislation and systems really are in the equation of, is the airbag worth it? Is the seatbelt worth it? Is driver attention monitoring worth it? Is autonomous braking worth it, etc.? The systems can and do go wrong. They cost money to maintain in
Mhm.
vehicles, but what is the value of that life is that intrinsic public safety question in a way that these rules are trying to assess. And I don't know if I have an answer to that, but it is just an interesting thing to ponder.
Oh, as your PR department, I would recommend you never answer that question. But the first thing that comes to mind is like an airbag. And let's just say theoretically, every time the airbag goes off, it breaks a nose, but
Hmm.
it'll save a life.
Hmm.
Um, most people go, I don't want to break my nose. It was a small fender bender. But then when you got in that accident where it saved your life, you go, break all the noses. It's all fine.
Hmm.
It's just sort of an interesting trade off there. I will say there goes beyond a big brother element. So I have a Tesla. I do not pay for full self driving. I have the standard autopilot. And I have had situations where it doesn't detect my hands on the wheel because there's always a weird fine line. You don't want to be too heavy on
Hmm.
the wheel. You don't want to be too light on the wheel. I lean towards too light on the wheel. And I have had it disengage that system and say, you are not allowed to use this until you park, turn off the vehicle, and start again because it believes I am an inattentive driver. But that one feels weird because I paid for a feature and that feature has now turned itself off. And after
Hmm.
a certain period of time, if I do too many, it'll turn itself off for a significant period of time. And I haven't looked all the way into it. I just know you're putting time out. but how can my product put me in timeout when I
Yep.
paid for it to do this thing? So that's another thing where if your car, in theory, says, "Hey, you've been inebriated 17 times this month. You're not allowed to turn your car on until you something."
Mhm, mhm,
There's
mhm.
a world where that saves somebody's life, but nobody's going to be happy about it while it's happening to them.
Mhm. Although all the autopilot people that are not putting their hands on the wheel or not steering the car, because this whole light-handed thing, it means you're not steering the car, that they deserve to be in timeout because you need to be steering your car. It's not a self-steering car. It's the it's the answer to that.
We'll agree to disagree. But again, it's just one of those questions. The technology's here, the software is here. When does the company say this is too much or too little? And this is kind of
Mhm.
where is older better because you don't have to deal with the nannies.
Yeah. You know what is not a self-steering car either? The new Polestar 5. Have you seen it?
I have seen it. I have also seen a price tag on it, and it is alarming.
She's expensive, yeah.
Yeah,
They're talking for the performance model, 141,600 euros, the equivalent of $165,000.
more
And
expensive than the current Polestars, that's for sure.
yes, well, Polestar did say ages ago that their mission was not to compete with Tesla, not to
Hmm.
compete with Mercedes necessarily. Their mission was to be the electric Porsche, which
Right.
is telling since, I mean, well, I'm saying something since Porsche is also going electric. So, uh,
Yeah.
this is targeting kind of Taycan, to be honest, more than Lucid Air. But there are some Lucid interesting corollaries here in a way, because it's going to be one of the fastest charging EVs out there. They're claiming 350 kilowatts peak charge rate, and their 112 kilowatt hour battery, which is pretty darn big, is going to
Yeah.
fill in about 20 minutes.
Yeah, that's humming. And is there any conversation about efficiency? Because that's also an interesting one where I mean there's a point where it's charging so quickly, how many
Mhm.
miles per hour doesn't matter, but the more efficient you get, the more miles you get per
Mhm.
minute of charging.
Yeah, Lucid like on the charging side, Taycan like on the
On the
efficiency side,
efficiency.
because it has significantly wider tires in the launch edition than a Lucid does, and that we'll get to tires a little bit later in the video where we talk about this, but significantly wider tires than we find in the Lucid. It's going to launch with 255s up front, 295s in the rear on 22-inch rims, 30 profile tires in the back, really, really like rubber bandy,
That
and
is really the thinnest tire I've seen in a long time.
yeah, and there are gonna be some serious performance tires too. It's about 5,400 pounds of curb weight, and it's a little bit heavier than Taycan, but it's bigger inside than Taycan by a pretty decent margin. So I'm
Mhm.
intrigued to see how it really compares. It seems like it's trying to be more of an electric Panamera than an
Okay.
electric Taycan, but 884 horsepower, 0 to 60 likely in under 3 seconds. They're quoting 3.1, but Polestar's been playing BMW's game where they over under promise and over deliver.
Mhm.
It's 200 inches long, so a little bit longer than Taycan.
Mhm.
120-inch wheelbase, notably longer than Taycan or Lucid Air on the wheelbase front.
Yeah, should be real stable.
Mhm,
This is one of those things where I agree that it's probably going to pass up Taycan in a number of different ways, but also Taycan is sort of I mean, really a Gen 1 high
mhm,
performance
mhm.
EV. And so this seems like what a Gen 2 Taycan would look like when you
Could be.
start doing some of these side by
Mhm.
sides. So that feels
Yeah.
like a new benchmark. And it's not taking anything away from Polestar because it's a good looking vehicle, fantastically quick, lots of features that I think people are going to shop against the Taycan and e-tron, GT, those sorts
Mhm.
of things. But I want to see the Germans punch back. That's actually the
Yeah.
thing I'm more excited about.
I am I am casually curious about Polestar's future. I just don't know if there's a future in it unless the parent company starts treating them more like Porsche, which I think would take too much time unless they're willing to spend the money on it. So for those that don't know, it is often reported based on assumptions because we don't know that intrinsically Porsche does not make money on their own on the car building side. It
Mhm.
appears that Porsche makes more revenue, sorry, not more revenue, but more profit from their licensing deals, their engineering deals with outside companies, etc. And
From
inside,
being Porsche versus
and
making Porsches.
right, from inside the Volkswagen envelope, Porsche, engineers they'll use Porsche technologies and other Volkswagen Group products, things like that, to make everything work. Of course, Porsche shares platforms with other things in the Volkswagen envelope to help reduce costs. So Taycan's bits and bobs weren't exclusive to Taycan. They're obviously in the Audi product line. Same
Hmm.
thing for everything other than the 911 basically is in some way or another used in other vehicles inside the Volkswagen envelope, which is totally logical and rational. But and Polestar is somewhat similar in that way, but Polestar doesn't have this ability to license the Polestar anythings outside diehard Polestar fans. They're not, nobody's out there buying Porsche pens and mugs and shirts and things like that without any hope of buying a Porsche.
Right, and that's where it's remained it's been the poster child. I mean, literally, like,
Mhm.
people, you have that Porsche poster, and you go, "Oh, I can
Yep.
do this. I want this." Polestar just isn't there at the moment, and I think what they'd have to do, on paper, the products they have right now that compete against direct Porsche models actually, I think, compete very well, especially since they are sort of this Gen 2 EV era where some of the Porsches are still Gen 1 and working their way to Gen 2. But they just don't have that name recognition. They just don't have the
Mhm.
I don't know. It's not interesting enough to go, ooh, I have a Polestar. And actually, I think Polestar so far has been a little bit too tame to do that. They've been a little bit too mainstream where Porsche's, not
Mhm.
just their ownership, but some of the vehicles they have out there, the ones that are at shows, they've got the heritage models, those sort of things. They they feel more boutique, and that's where
Yeah.
Polestar just isn't at the moment. So on paper, I think they're doing what they set out to do, but there's a whole lot more to it.
Yep. And for those that don't know, the Porsche Design Studio has a whole ton of weird things that they've designed.
Oh my
Uh,
God.
I mean, wind turbines, Opals. They've designed Audis for Audi. They've designed motorcycles. They apparently designed some of the interiors for Scania trucks.
Mm.
The interior in a Citroen. They designed like hard drive cases. They even designed a forklift for Lind. I mean, crane trucks and things like that. Like
I
Porsche,
s- I
Porsche
saw
will
a Porsche
design
design
anything.
side by side
Yes,
the other day. It was like a Razor side by side that was Porsche design.
and jet skis have designed jet skis, etc. So Porsche will design anything if you've got enough money and you want a
Mhm.
certain aesthetic. The Porsche Design Studio apparently will do
Plus
that.
the racing brand, they've
Hmm.
they've got all of that puts a lot of Porsche
Yeah.
badges on a lot of merchandise. And
And importantly, in the historic times, Porsche did also do engineering services for other car companies. Like car companies could go to Porsche with questions about a head design, et cetera, and Porsche would work with them on, developing new designs for heads, et cetera. There are rumors that Volvo was, a customer in the before times in the 70s, for instance, and 80s, for assistance, engineering assistance from Porsche. But that's not Polestar's game in a way. And they started with the Polestar 1. We won't talk about that because that doesn't make sense in the lineup. But the
I still need
Polestar
to drive
2,
one. But yes, go on.
yeah, Polestar 2 was based on a Volvo S40 concept. So relatively affordable small car, etc. That's their volume play. Now they have Polestar 3, which is bigger and more expensive and very Volvo based still. Polestar
Mhm.
4, about the same price. But now we're jumping into Polestar 5, which is double the price tag of any of these other things. And I'm just wondering, obviously it's going to be a hard sell at the beginning. There are going to be some diehard fans, some people interested in the style, et cetera, that are definitely going to go out and jump into a $165,000 car.
Mhm.
But without spending money on Polestar itself, the parent company Geely, what are they going to get out of this if they're not willing to redesign this $165,000 car on the same schedule that Porsche would redesign a car or someone else would redesign a competitive car? How's that going to work? I don't know.
I think it's almost a weird world where they maybe should have built a better, faster, more expensive version to just kick everything in the teeth and say, "Here we go, here we are," become that poster of some kind. As far as like the brand status,
Mhm.
but and that would sell half the volume of the Polestar 5, perhaps. But obviously, but what's the volume on something like a Polestar 5? So I don't know. It raises a lot of questions. And it's not just Porsche. Like we said, we have something like the Audi e-tron GT that
Mhm.
is still out there, and that I need to look up sales numbers. I'll do that some other time. But between Taycans and GTs, not including Cross Turismos, because they should be 100%
Yeah.
an Avant version. Although Audi just said their RS6 e-tron is not happening. I saw a report there,
Yeah.
and that's not surprising, but is disappointing. But we also have Lucid, who says, if Lucid wants to turn up the dial, and Tesla is not really in that ballpark, but if they said our plaid's going super plaid, and we've got the Lucid Super Air, that market actually does get a little bit tight pretty quickly. So I don't know where
Exactly.
Polestar comes out on this one.
Yeah, because you're really going to be limiting range a lot. We don't know range figures. It's about 400 miles WLTP range theoretically in Europe. So in the US, by the time it gets here, Polestar 5 maybe could do 300 miles would
The
be my
high
guess.
twos, really low threes.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
depending on options, if they have the kind of performance packages that are available in Taycan, you could definitely get way under 3, even with a battery that's that big. The battery is decently bigger than a Taycan battery, but we're still talking about the same sort of realities when it comes to rolling resistance, etc. Which brings us along to the tire talk.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So recently, again, sorry, Nissan's getting a lot of plugs today, but I was really, and in full disclosure, I was really excited to go drive this new Leaf, and so excited to tell everyone about it
Have they turned
because,
over a new leaf?
oh God, I
Boom.
just can't pull myself into that because everyone else is going to do it. Um,
Or is the leaf dying on the vine?
okay, we'll workshop this offline. The Leaf is all new. I mean, truly all new, and there's
It's
it.
spring. It's spring again in the
Yeah,
forest.
yeah. Sorry, folks. This is going to be a tough one. Alex has had his coffee. He got a little bit of sleep. So, here's the thing. There's a 300, Alex, listen to me. There's a 300-mile Nissan Leaf now, and that's awesome. And the way normally we do these events is they have you drive to a point, and then you drive to a second point. They'll feed you lunch, and then you drive home. At point number 1, there was a first-gen Leaf.
Aw.
And the reason it was at point number 1 is because it could not get to point number 2, which was actually quite a ways out there. We were doing mostly highway, did lots of climbing, and that Gen 1 didn't have the range. Gen 2 probably could have made it there, but you would have run into issues on the way back. The whole point is we have a 300-mile Leaf, as long as you get the right model. The S Plus is rated for 303 miles. That's obviously not highway, but we just got to work with the numbers we have. The SV Plus has a 288-mile range, and the only difference between those two models is obviously a little bit heavier on the SV Plus. When you start adding features, your vehicle gets heavier. That obviously reduces your efficiency. But they have the same 18-inch wheel size. They have the same tire, but the difference comes down to the wheel design. And that just right there is a wheel with an aero cover versus a standard-ish alloy-looking wheel. And you drop, 20 miles of EV range, or, something very close to. That adds up. And then if you go up to the top end trim, which goes from a 215 tire to a 235, which is not a small jump, all things considered, and it moves to a 19-inch wheel, which is less efficient. Now we're all the way down to 259 miles. So we've dropped another almost 30 miles at that point.
Yep.
And that just has to do with wheels and tires.
Yep. Little tiny segue here. We'll get back. It is interesting. Car companies are generally not required to report fuel efficiency variances on different trims and different trim packages unless they're expected to be more than a particular percentage of the sales blend. That's
right. There's
I
a
believe
variance.
believe how the rules work there. But it is interesting. Some car companies don't bother to do this. Like Tesla is notorious for this. They give you one range figure for everything, even though there may be options that will dramatically change the range because they don't need to. And then BMW loves to give you range figures for everything, even though when they really do not need to. So if you ever want to see what impact different wheel and tire sizes and designs can have on your EV, just tootle on over to the BMW website, launch a configurator for one of their EVs, and they'll give you all the different optional wheels and how that will impact your range in that same car. Kind of a handy thing to know.
Mm-hmm. Rivian will do the same thing, and they've got they've got a larger variance in what kind of tires you're using as well. I will mention that they do use a different tire compound for this top end trim Nissan, which is going to be more, I want to say performance oriented, but it's a nicer tire versus more of an eco tire.
Yeah.
We're speaking all things relative, but the question was, because I put it out there on our Facebook page, a range from 303 to 259. They said, is that just on wheels and tires? Short answer is yes. And
Hmm.
there's a video by someone up in my area, folks over at Engineering Explained, Jason, who just bought a new Lucid, and he is all about efficiency. So he and I are on the same wavelength there. But he basically talks about in combustion vehicles, even in hybrid vehicles, if you're trying to make the vehicle more efficient, you can spend all of your time and energy on the internal combustion engine itself because that's where you lose all the efficiencies. But when we get to EVs, most of the efficiency loss is coming in the shape of the vehicle and things like the
Hmm.
tire compound and your rolling resistance. That's just so different from all these other vehicles. So that's why, you've never worried about an 18-inch wheel or a 19-inch wheel on
Yeah.
your, I don't know, fill in the blank, your Chevy Blazer internal
Hmm.
combustion. But if you look at the EV, you go, oh, why does that start to matter? And it's fascinating to me. I mean, it's nerdy beyond reason,
Hmm.
um, but it really does start to add up.
Yeah, percentages are important, and people misunderstand this because they're looking at a number rather than the percentage difference here. So, for instance, if you're driving a 20 mile per gallon car and X causes a 5% loss in efficiency, you're probably not going to notice or even care because we're talking numbers that are so small. But if you have a
Mhm.
5% change in a car that's getting 50 miles per gallon, you're going to notice it more readily because the number change is going to be
Mhm.
bigger to your eyes, even though the percentage change is actually about the same. So when we're talking about efficiency on EVs, this is especially important. One interesting twist, the BZ and the Solterra actually saw a pretty significant efficiency improvement just in replacing their inverters with better inverters. That had a bigger impact than I thought on those vehicles. But tires and tire compounds are very important. Rolling resistance is going to be a big, big deal out on the open highway, as well as you said, aeroshape, and that's part of why we see big batteries being needed on trucks. You're not going to get a truck to move down the road in any sort of efficient way and have it still be a truck. That there's
Mhm.
the aerodynamic reality of that. And and remember that coefficients of drag are coefficients. It's not an absolute number. It's not like the wind resistance is X. That's how you get to the wind resistance for a vehicle of the same general profile. So, bigger vehicle, taller vehicle, et cetera, they can have a really slinky coefficient of drag. It still takes more energy to push them through the air than a smaller vehicle, a lower to the ground vehicle, et cetera. And that's how Lucid, for instance, gets those really great efficiency numbers. It's low to the ground. It's really slick and slinky. It has a low roof line, et cetera. And they're really trying to dial in all of that. Also, skinny tires, because rolling resistance is definitely a function of tire width. And this is where, you know, we get in trouble sometimes thinking about tire size and tire dimension. When you take a look at tires out there for the uninitiated, the first number, tires are fun anyway because worldwide they're this awkward combination of metric and imperial measurements,
Uh-huh.
right? And we shouldn't even call it an imperial measurement anymore because it's America that does it now, and even the British have
Freedom units.
mostly abandoned the imperial measurement system. Although I love the fact that they retain it in certain weird ways. At any rate, that's a whole different.
Miles per hour, that sort of thing.
Well, weighing people in stone, for instance, that's always fun. Because you weigh people in stone, you get your milk in gallons, you get your beer in pints, but you buy your sodas in metric and your gasoline in liters, but you're rated in miles per gallon, but it's not the same gallon that we have. Any rate, all that fun. So tires, the first measurement is millimeters width for the tread, section width of the tire, not
Mhm.
necessarily tread width, because that's a whole different conversation. Section width of the tire, then we get the aspect ratio, then we get the wheel size in inches. So metric for your section width, the ratio of width to wheel size, then you get the wheel size. So the 60 series means basically how much cushion you get beyond between that wheel and the road. Then tread width can vary. So generally speaking, a 255 width tire should have more tread than a 245 millimeter wide tire, but not necessarily as much as 10 millimeters. It's a general thing.
Yeah.
It also gives you an indication of what will fit in a wheel well. So if your car can handle a maximum width of 255 within the design constraints of suspension components and everything else, then you could get a tire that can maximize that tread width there a little bit more. But importantly, the actual contact patch of your vehicle on the ground is not necessarily a function of the width of the tire because the weight of the vehicle and the tire inflation pressure has impact here as well. So the contact patch is going to be a lot of these variables together. And if you take a vehicle that was designed for a 225 millimeter wide tire and you put a 255 millimeter wide tire on it, you've generally speaking widened the contact patch and made it shorter front to back. There are pros and cons to this. Generally speaking, you're going to get better lateral grip if it's wider, and you're going to get better stopping distances if it is longer, because the way that friction and traction works in these axes is critical and important. So there is an optimal width and an optimal length contact patch for every vehicle for every different situation, and it's a game of playing these situations and what's appropriate for the vehicle and the customer that you're selling the car to.
And the trade-offs as well. So,
Mm-hmm.
maybe this is the best contact patch, but when we put this tire size on it, there's certain frequencies that make their way into the vehicle. It's too loud. It's not
Mm-hmm.
efficient enough. It's the cost of replacing tires depending on what the vehicle is. There's the manufacturing. Let's stick with a pretty consistent size
Mm-hmm.
tire so that we're not building something from
Right.
scratch and have to pay extra money on that. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, well, there's the
Yeah.
bean counter aspect of it as well.
Likelihood of hydroplaning is a big factor that I think a lot of people don't always think of. So, if you take a given vehicle, say a Toyota Grand Highlander, and you chose to put even wider tires on it than you had from the factory, your risk of hydroplaning goes up, but your handling general lateral grip goes up as well. So, you'll get a better handling, quote unquote, better handling Grand Highlander. But in the winter, in a rainy area, you may be at greater risk of hydroplaning, all things being equal, which very frequently they're not.
Right.
So it's
Yeah. So
lots
we,
of
we say
factors.
we say tires are fun, but that's from a very, very nerdy perspective. And
Yeah.
then there's the question, like I said, in this case, we're talking about two different tire makes. So it's not
Hmm.
just different sizes, but they're actually a totally different tread pattern and
Exactly.
different variation in compound. So that is going to make a bigger
Hmm.
difference as well. But yeah, the question was, what is there really that big of a gap? And the answer is yes.
Yeah.
We see it so much more in EVs. And actually, to your point about measuring efficiencies, this is a conversation I had around a dinner table. It was that now we're starting to see cars or regular vehicles, non-hybrid, non-whatever, talk about their range as well. And very few people in the world have ever asked how far can I go on a tank of gas. But now that range has become part of
Hmm.
marketing speak, with an
Hmm.
EV, they go, "Oh, here's how far you can go on this." Number one,
Hmm.
they're trying to say you can go farther, and generally
Yes.
speaking, that's true because it's easier to put a bigger gas tank in than it is to put a larger battery pack. But it's not as big of a differential these days as it would have been 10 years ago. So that's sort of an interesting one for me. And then to your point about the efficiency, I had that Tacoma Trail Hunter, which is to my mind, I'm pretty sure the least efficient version of the Tacoma.
Problem.
Um, well, the hybrid versions, right? The hybrid variants.
Hmm.
Because in this case, I had the one with a 6 foot bed. Wild, by the way, that you have to get a $63,000 Tacoma to get a hybrid and a 6 foot bed, but that's the only one that has it. It also has hundreds of pounds of steel components added on from the factory, underneath front or rear bumpers, utility racks, et cetera, et cetera. And then it doesn't have the air dam that you get on the lower end trims, which does help with aerodynamics, not
Hmm.
maybe enormous. And also it has 33-inch more off-road oriented tires, which are not as good for efficiency, but somehow that has the same rating as the TRD off-road, which is
Hmm.
obviously like a similar vein, but not the same. And it's a close rating to the limited, but the limited does have a different powertrain layout,
Yep.
full-time all-wheel drive versus part-time. But let me tell you, I did not get the rated range on that one, and
Yeah.
I'm guessing if you did those tests, if they had to do EPA testing on that one, if they were somehow farther apart, you would find probably some different numbers.
Yeah, tires have a big, big, big impact. With all-terrain tires, there's a component of this that is tread design related. So you're going to create more wind resistance. The tires tend to be heavier for all-terrain tires, et cetera. So that's going to have an effect. We also have differing compounds in the tires. That's going to have an effect on those all-terrain tires as well. And then there's the size of the tire, the mechanical advantage you get, and the diameter of the tire can have an impact here also. We have a Kia Sportage in at the moment, the X
Mhm.
Pro, and the X Pro all-wheel drive loses 2 miles per gallon. Pretty significant, and we're talking about 24 miles per gallon.
Yeah,
versus the non-X Pro with the same all-wheel drive system, same curb weight, same practically everything, same ground clearance because
that was what I was going to ask is ground
because
clearance.
yeah, because X Pro is literally a styling, looks good off-road package with an all-terrain tire that you could swap in yourself. Like there's no extra actual capability in this thing.
Right.
And that really tells you the kinds of difference you can get with different tire compounds. Summer tires tend to be very sticky, so they're going to have better friction on the road, and that's obviously going to lead to greater rolling resistance. And EV tires are this blend of different needs. They need to be able to stop a heavier vehicle still quickly. They need to be able to handle well, but they need to lower rolling resistance. And so the solution to this has historically been different compounds in the tire. When we're talking about the actual rubber in the tire, tread patterns, etc., different sidewalls, but also the addition of silica, which is kind of interesting. So it's a specific kind of silica sand that's actually put in the rubber in the tire to give you basically glass shards, for lack of a better word, when you think about it, like glass shards gripping the road.
Yeah,
And that's
force
pretty
grip there.
cool. Yeah, because silica has a lower impact on rolling resistance while still giving you increased grip in braking, acceleration, and handling performance. It's actually pretty darn cool. The reason we don't see that in all the tires out there, and it's taken a while to get this kind of silica in the tires, is that basically you're sandblasting the inside of all the machines that are making tires when you put this kind of gritty material inside the rubber instead of just oozing out easily like like syrup. You're basically forcing an abrasive thing through that orifice
Components that
in
don't want to be abrased.
right, and so everything's just going to wear out faster basically.
Yeah, and don't forget the inclusion of foam, more
Hmm.
significant inclusion of foam to stop some road noise because you're not getting engine noise. It's one of those things where there's driving
Hmm.
technologies that we'll see carried all the way through. And yeah, it's a real nerdy subject for folks who hung in there. Thanks so much because tires aren't for everyone, but I find them wildly fascinating. And there's just not a world, at least we're not set up right now. And if someone wants to give us a call and figure out a way to do it, my vehicle right now, I'd love to tell you everything about my driving experience in my Tesla Model 3, but I can't tell you what happens if I swap out tires. I can tell you
Hmm.
what I expect to happen, but I can't do the same loop 5 different times with my
Yep.
vehicle just swapping out different tires. Say, hey, here's how this is better. That's why it's not a bad idea to just stick with the OEM tire that you have because that
Hmm.
one you will know what you're getting. Anything else is unfortunately a roll of the dice. And anyone else who says, hey, especially forums, online forums are going to be the best place for information and the worst place because they say, oh man, this made this so much quieter for me, but they have an entirely different,
Hmm.
road construction than what you have. Or their driving style is entirely different, and there's just no way to measure out these variables. So,
Yep, my
yeah.
recommendation is tire rack on that one. And let's move on now to some family vehicles. We have the Toyota Highlander, one of the OG crossovers, still here for 2026. Grand Highlander hasn't
Mhm.
replaced it yet, but it is now significantly more expensive if you just want to get your foot in the Highlander's door. The base model is now going to start at 45,270 because the former base model is dead.
Right. So the Highlander is not now more expensive than the Grand Highlander side by side, but you got to pay more to get the Highlander to begin with. I think this makes sense, and I obviously the Grand Highlander has taken a lot of sales away from Highlander, and they say, hey, people who are looking for the value
Hmm.
version of this, honestly, are probably looking at the Grand Highlander anyway. It also pushes people that direction even further. They say, hey, if this is the money you're going to spend, why not go a little bit further? But
Hmm.
I don't know. I think this is a slow decline to the end of the Highlander, and honestly, it's a little bit disappointing. Not in a
Hmm.
horrific loss because the Grand Highlander is a great replacement, but right now Toyota has, and I mentioned this a couple weeks ago because I had the Toyota Crown. I said that Crown falls between a Rav4 and a Highlander, and it's neither of those vehicles at all.
Hmm.
There's just such a range for what you're looking for.
Yeah.
And if you're trying to get 3 rows that you use very occasionally, and you don't need any bigger vehicle, but you're looking for that Toyota, that Highlander's been there for you.
Yeah, I suspect that in the next generation, Highlander is going to change in some form or another because it does appear that we're going to get another one. I'm just
Hmm.
wondering if it's going to turn into more of a passporty kind of thing. At
Okay.
45,270, It is a couple $100 more really than the Grand Highlander. Now, across the board, the Highlander only went up $200. So it's this deletion of the base trim. But it does mean that you could get yourself in a Kia Sorento, which is the same size inside as a Highlander,
Mhm.
for over $12,000 less. And you could actually get yourself in a hybrid Sorento for $5,000 less than a
Then the
Highlander.
hybrid Highlander. The
Yeah.
hybrid
Then,
Highlander
then
or just the Highlander?
than just a base Highlander. Yeah, you can get
Yeah.
yourself hybrid Sorento for 5 grand less than the least expensive gasoline Highlander, and you could also get yourself a plug-in hybrid Sorento for about the same as a hybrid Highlander, if you
Yeah,
were
and
interested in that.
I think between you and me, I'm probably leaning towards that Sorrento
Mhm.
in just about any of those guys. Is again nothing against the Highlander,
Mhm.
but I really like that Sorrento.
Yeah,
But
I
what
think
you're
this
not
was a
going to
good
get
value.
is the what you're not going to get is that Toyota resale value. But you know what else has pretty good resale value? Those Kias and Hyundais these
Yeah.
days.
Yeah, calculated resale value the way ALG would know, but in real world situations, you probably are getting really darn close on that Kia. But speaking of
Mhm.
family vehicles, this leads me to my next question that I am pondering after having driven the Chrysler Pacifica last week, which
Mhm.
is still my favorite minivan. The Pacifica plug-in hybrid, I think, is the best minivan available in the US right now if you can afford one, which is definitely
Mhm.
a problem because it's losing its tax credit in the before times. You would
Yeah.
expect to roll into a Chrysler dealer and pay at least $15,000 less than the actual MSRP on a plug-in hybrid Pacifica. But now
Yeah.
prices are going up. But also, and importantly, I make this point in the video coming up, just to not to spoil it too much. I think the problem for minivans is that they're all old. Sienna's the
Mhm.
newest of the bunch,
Mhm.
not saying a whole lot there because it's not a great minivan to be, painfully honest. It's
Carnival's
lost
probably kind of close to it
it yeah, it's like Sienna
in
lost a
age.
decent amount of practicality here in the lack of removable second row seats, long a hallmark of minivans.
Mhm.
None of the minivans do as well as you might hope in crash tests. Odyssey actually got a pretty bad rating in the new IHS moderate offset. So your
Mhm.
pilot's safer, quote unquote, by the numbers.
Yep.
And all of them or none of them drive as well as this recent crop of family focused SUV crossover things. Palisade, Acadia, Grand Highlander, the new Pilot, etc. So, while I was once team minivan, always the answer, my
Mhm.
question is, what do you think? Is it really, are we seeing the end of the minivan era, or is it time for minivan companies to just try and actually do something better?
I mean, time to fight back, right? I mean, I think, like you mentioned, the list of vehicles that are driving better to your mind. I haven't done too much of the side
Mhm.
by side, and I've really loved the way minivans drive. Not as far as their dynamic capabilities,
Mhm.
but just cruising, right? They
Yeah.
are hard to beat. But the SUV has softened, so we're not looking at an
Mhm.
expedition when we're talking about these. We're talking about the crossover style,
Right.
and that has gotten quieter and more comfortable and
And
much more
bigger.
car like. Yep, and cavernous, right? And
Mhm.
that's exactly what you got out of a minivan. The hard part here is that the companies building these minivans have also been building these SUVs
Exactly.
that are getting crossoverified. And where do you put that R&D money? So
Mhm.
why would you spend a bunch of money to go build an Odyssey that is losing market share to a Pilot? But I would argue if you put the money in the Odyssey, you can win back a lot of that market. If you say, "Hey, we are
Yeah.
not ground up, right? But we're saying we are putting the significant resources into this model, but it's more of a risk, I think, than most manufacturers want to take at this point." And
Yeah.
the one that does set itself apart, so now we've got hybrid models, we've got minivans with all-wheel drive. There's only one with that plug-in hybrid. That's the Pacifica. That's kind of the one that feels like it sets it apart for
Mhm.
me, is that is the most complete as far as I can do just about everything. But that one can't do all wheel drive when you get the plug-in hybrid.
Right.
And there are a bunch of people that go, no, 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 I need all wheel drive. who
Yeah.
I will die on this hill 100% do not, but they won't buy a vehicle without it.
And the only
So
one
what
that
do you
gets
do?
real all-wheel drive is the non-hybrid Pacifica, because the one in the Sienna uses the RAV4's hybrid system essentially, and that electric motor is just not powerful enough to really do a whole lot in the Sienna if you quote unquote need all-wheel drive.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it does improve traction. It's better than not having anything in the back, but it is not going to be as capable, quote unquote, in the snow or wherever as a Pacifica all-wheel drive. But here's
Right. You're
the
not
thing.
getting a Forester all-wheel drive in your
Yeah.
Sienna.
Here's the thing. It's like 25, 30 years ago, it was a no-brainer for the minivan because they had, the semi-independent or independent rear suspensions. They had low centers of gravity, and they were being compared against Suburban, Tahoe, Expedition, etc., the full-size
Easy win.
SUVs. Easy wins, right? They didn't have independent suspension in the back. They had stiff leaf springs. They rode like shit. Like, no one wants God, I mean, Escalades, you don't want to be in the third row of an old Escalade. They're terrible in the back.
It's just a truck.
But now,
You're right in the bed of a truck.
right, and they were less expensive. That was a big sales job too. Like the minivan was significantly less expensive. Well, minivans are still less expensive than Tahoe or etc., right? But they are not less expensive than Grand Highlander or Palisade or etc. That
Hmm.
is the tricky part. And well, you do give up cargo practicality and you don't have seats that fold into the floor quite the same way or come out. If you get
Right.
an Acadia or a Grand Highlander, you get more power, you get all-wheel drive, you get more comfortable seats in some of these vehicles, more
Hmm.
features, a more modern vehicle.
There's an argument for, okay, but you lose some practicality, like in that
Hmm.
cargo volume. And you go, I load my vehicle with a bunch of stuff, and I have a bunch of people, and you go, okay, then go get a Ford Transit
Yeah.
that has some removable seats. Or like it's the business use case where they could go fleet, something like a Kia Carnival, and they go, oh, but again, like they have more focused vans
Hmm.
that are not minivans. They're business vans, and
Yep.
I think the market share is decreasing. I'm going to miss it a little bit. I think we're on the way out, and,
Yep.
and that's where I'm going to stand on this. But for me, that's a loss. I've loved what a minivan is. I've loved what it represented. I love the efficiency of it. You weren't carrying around more vehicle than you need, but my God, you got so much space and comfort, and
Yep.
they got all the feature sets before these the Escalades of the world came around.
There's
As
that.
long as we keep the crossovers that
Mhm.
are in that vein, then we won't have completely lost them. But the coolness of the minivan, boy, was that short lived.
That was definitely a thing, but it was also a different era, and I think that's maybe it's like I hate this probably give you the death knell to the big crossover, but in a way they're the minivan of now, right? So,
Mm, mm,
but because they're the right size thing for the family of now. When we go
mhm.
back and think about this, 35 years or so ago, when the first Chrysler minivans rolled off, families were larger. The average family size was, solidly three plus in many areas of the country. And now we
Yeah,
do not see that anymore. The average family with young children now is somewhere, I think it's like 1.5 children on average, something like that. So we're talking lots of single kid households, some two kid households, and very, very few three or more households. They definitely exist. I've got in-laws that have,
yeah.
four and five kids, but
But
that
we
is
know somebody, not we know a bunch
right.
of them.
They are the exception by far, not the rule. And previously, when you were looking at the family vehicle, that was more the rule. We
Hmm.
also have a aging set of people that buy new cars. So previously, the minivans were purchased by younger people. Now, when we look at who buys a new car, they've advanced at least by a decade, and the average new car buyer is in their 50s. They're not out there with young kids that need to be transported. And so I kind of wonder if that's just this is more logical. It's like, yes, you
Hmm.
cannot put as much luggage in a Grand Highlander or an Acadia or a Palisade
Right.
as a Sienna or an Odyssey, but do you need to? Because how often are you really jamming that many people into it? And
Full of
if you
people and their
right,
stuff.
and if you fold down the third row, as most people will spend almost all of their time in these things anyway,
Yeah.
then even though you still don't have as much as a minivan, you get closer, and it probably doesn't make as much of a difference in that case because you still got such a huge cargo area.
Yeah, and I think there's also a world. I mean, obviously depending on where you live, but it wouldn't work where I'm at because we don't really have it. But if I have the in-laws in town
Hmm.
and they say, "Oh man, we gotta," we're trying to get everyone out to the play, to the show, whatever. Okay, then order an Uber XL.
Hmm.
That way you don't have to worry about any of it. Oh, we'll take the kid in the car seat and we'll meet you guys there. And that way you don't even have to rent a car for the week to do something bigger. But you can't always rent a car. Just remember that you can always rent a minivan for the weekend. The in-laws are in town instead of having to buy a minivan when you don't need one.
That's definitely true. And to be honest, for a lot of families out there, the single kid households, even two kid households, a 7 seat crossover SUV is still going to fit the in laws unless
Yep.
both sets come in or you have a bigger family. Still reasons to get those. But I just have this sneaking suspicion that we're going to see over time a gradual, ebbing of the number and variation of minivans available in the US because they have become more expensive than a lot of the SUV counterparts. Now, previously that was not the case. They were the less expensive option. Now it's kind of moved into this other world, but they all seem like they're somehow caught in a time warp. Carnival's probably the freshest feeling to me inside and outside, probably because of its popularity still in its domestic market of South Korea. But Odyssey seems old inside. Pacifica seems old inside. I mean, they
Or
still got a
or it's the
Blu-ray,
ID Buzz.
yeah,
That's
Blu-ray.
totally different.
True, but they still got a Blu-ray rear seat entertainment system. I mean,
Right.
who's I don't know who's
Who
doing
buys
that.
Blu-rays?
I don't know.
Yeah.
Not me. And it did make me think here. Part of me borrowing the Pacifica for a week to give it a whirl and give it a review was kind of like, oh, am I going to get out of this Pacifica thinking to myself, huh, I have a kid, I need a minivan.
Mhm.
Um, the answer is no.
Yeah, and honestly, if you leave a week with a minivan and you have been one of the biggest pro minivan people, and you go, yeah, I don't know. I think that's pretty telling.
Exactly. And with that out of the way, let us know what you think about the death of the minivan. And do you still want one? Do you have one? Is there still a reason to minivan in 2025 or 2026? You can send us a voicemail to hey@autobuyersguide.com, just a voice memo on your phone, or you can call us at 669-842-1947. You can also drop us an email and be sure and give us those 5-star reviews because we haven't had one in about a week or so. And that fills us all with
Goodness.
sadness.
I know. But thank you for listening and thank you for watching.